So Larry Fink just quietly published a brand new letter that confirms the absolute unthinkable. In it, he directly said, quote, "In a new model of globalization, markets should channel citizen savings into local businesses and infrastructure." Isn't that exactly what the European Central Bank just recently said in multiple different blog posts? So this letter from Larry Fink should be forcing us to ask ourselves lots of different questions. Why is he now parroting the same things that the European Central Bank is talking about? And what about the timing of this? Larry Fink published this letter about 45 days before he was made the new co-chair of the World Economic Forum. Is Larry Fink now going to be the man put in charge of executing the World Economic Forum's vision for 2030, where they openly say, you will own nothing and you will be happy? So there are a number of very head-scratching quotes in this letter from Larry Fink that we're going to be diving into today. But again, let's set the table here. I get it. There's a ton of videos on the internet exposing Larry Fink and BlackRock. We're not going to be rehashing all of the same stories and ideas that people have been talking about. I just want to focus on Larry Fink's more recent moves, because I think he's left a little trail of breadcrumbs that we can look into and maybe expose what his true plans are. So let's not forget, let's set the table here with the video that nobody talks about. 11 years ago, Larry Fink was on record for openly saying the markets don't like capitalism. They like totalitarianism.
Uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. Markets like actually totalitarian governments where you have a understanding of what's out there, and obviously the whole dimension is changing now with, as you said, a democratization of countries, and democracies are very messy, as we know in the United States.
Now, the reason why that 2011 clip of Larry Fink is very important to be aware of is right now there is this global push in the UK, Europe, and even more recently in New York for leaders talking about the need to confiscate people's assets. The UK is talking about savings limits. Europe's talking about savings limits. The new mayor of New York is openly talking about confiscating assets and homes from landlords who don't pay to repair a leaky roof or a gutter that's out of place. This is a global push, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Larry Fink is being installed as the co-chair or the co-leader of the global organization, the World Economic Forum. I don't think there's a coincidence with how all of these events over the past 2 and 3 months have kind of unfolded. So with all of that said and the table kind of set, so to say, let's dive into this new letter from Larry. So this was the letter that was published in the Financial Times. It was originally behind a paywall, but I was able to do a little bit of internet digging, and I'm able to show you the entire letter that Larry Fink wrote, titled, "It's time for the second draft of globalization." So Larry Fink opens up this letter talking about tariffs, and again, tariffs and global market valuations and the AI bubble. This has all been the distraction that's allowed Larry Fink to publicly write this letter on June 2nd without getting any attention of it. Again, who has talked about this letter from Larry Fink? Nobody. And don't you think it's coincidental that this was written about 45 days before Larry was made co-chair at the World Economic Forum? Again, there's no coincidence in the timing of these events. But the most consequential quote that comes at the beginning of this letter is where Larry Fink says this. He says the Trump administration's tariffs are the symptom of a backlash to the era of what might be called globalization without guardrails. Again, what are these guardrails? Why do free markets need guardrails? Again, markets like totalitarianism. Let's continue reading. Global GDP grew more since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 than in all recorded history before it. But the benefits weren't evenly shared. S&P 500 investors saw a return of more than 3,800%, but Rust Belt workers did not. Can you see what he's trying to frame here? He's trying to lean into the inequality narrative. Oh, we have to share these profits. So then Larry says it's no surprise that this model of globalization is now coming apart, but its proposed replacement economic nationalism behind sealed borders isn't any more convincing. Again, Larry's trying to frame nationalization and tariffs and countries looking after themselves and working in their own best interests as the bad guy. So then Larry says, the real question here is what replaces the model that led us to this point? And the answer is coming into focus. It's neither globalization nor protectionism, but a blend. Open markets with national goals and workers in mind. And this is where one of the punchlines comes in. Larry says, at the heart of this new model are the capital markets, exchanges where people invest in stocks, bonds, infrastructure, everything. Why? Because markets are uniquely suited to transforming global growth into local wealth, even though historically that hasn't always happened. Under globalization, money chased returns around the world without necessarily benefiting the people back home. We should still want capital to move freely towards opportunity. That's what makes markets efficient. But that doesn't mean countries can't steer more of that capital home. Again, maybe I'm just wearing a tinfoil hat and I can't, maybe I'm connecting dots that aren't there. But there's lots of little hints in all of his language and choice of words that for me makes it look concerning. Again, why are we steering money in any direction? The reason why we've gone from living in dirt in the 1700s and banging rocks and sticks together, pillaging fields full of wheat and grain, to today in 2025 we're sending rockets to the moon. The reason why we've seen all this growth is free markets and capitalism. Again, why have all of the major technological breakthroughs in the past 100 years happened in America? Because there were less guardrails, because there was less steering. Again, look at the countries who have steered the most and have the most control. China and now Europe. Why are these places and regions of the world struggling so much with entrepreneurship and creating capital? It's because there are more guardrails, but Larry seems to be ignoring that. Larry says that in a more nationally attuned model, markets channel citizen savings into local businesses and infrastructure. He says that this is so that the gains flow back to people, helping them afford homes, education, retirement. Put simply, people will fuel their country's economic growth and own a piece of it. But is that entirely true? Is the reason that house prices are so expensive today because we haven't steered enough capital where it needs to go? Of course not. Why should we think that central planners know what to do with our capital? We can see that in the past, 100 years, in the 20th century and the 21st century, the bigger that the government becomes as a percentage of GDP, this is the cleanest representation of bigger government and more rules and more regulation, the more inefficient the world's become. The richer the rich have gotten and the poorer the poor have gotten. And the wider the wealth inequality has grown and the more expensive homes have become. This has all continued to grow and become a bigger problem the bigger the government come, the bigger that the government has gotten. This is why I think that reality doesn't match what Larry Fink and people like Christine Lagarde are trying to frame as the problem. They're trying to say this unfettered free market capitalism has created this distorted world, and it's not true. This framing, or should I say reframing and projection, is really important to pay very close attention to, because I think what Larry is saying and what Christine Lagarde is saying and what the leaders of Canada, Australia, countries like France and Spain are all saying, they're all interconnected. They're all dropping you little nuggets and clues of what they're going to do next. And they're trying to say, look, the reason why the world is so screwed today is because of unfettered capitalism and globalization, and we need to change the world. They're trying to appeal to the little guys, the guys who are getting screwed. Again, we can see wealth inequality is so wide right now, and every 80 or 90 years when we go through these cycles, which are very linked with debt cycles and political cycles like the 90-year fourth turn-in, people will vote for dramatic change because it is true. They are fed up. They feel the wealth inequality. They feel the high cost of living, and they are going to be most susceptible to narratives like this being spun by by Larry Fink, BlackRock, and all of these other guys, like the recent mayor of New York who wants to seize the evil landlord's property if they don't pay for a repair on time.
Starting on day one, we will expand the city's special enforcement programs, doubling fines for hazardous violations and tripling them for conditions that are immediately dangerous. And when a really bad landlord, like this guy, refuses to fix it, the city's gonna step in, make the repairs, and send them the bill. If that doesn't work, the city's taking over the building. We're putting the worst landlords out of business.
Look at what he says next. The first step? Helping more people become investors. This is a deeper shift I'm seeing in the economy. Governments are rethinking whom markets are for. For decades, they primarily served countries' wealthiest citizens and largest institutions. Now, countries are democratizing markets, recognizing that the same factory worker left behind by globalization can be an investor too. Again, it's a nice narrative, but it's not an accurate narrative. The narrative that it sounds like to me that Larry is painting is the same one being talked about by the Savings Investment Union. They've written on multiple occasions the need to mobilize private capital to push that into funding EU priorities. And of course, the Savings Investment Union, they're linked to the Rearm Europe initiative, which of course is all about defense spending and things like that. This is why a lot of people have published articles saying Europe wants to go after that $10 trillion in savings accounts and, well, using that to fund EU priorities. I need to be careful with what I say. Let's move on. And again, with that framing, you're kind of able to see what Larry Fink's true narrative is here. Here we go. Speaking of Europe, Larry says, every market has two sides, the people who invest and the places where capital gets put to work. Ensuring it's put to work domestically is hard. And in Europe, for instance, it has triggered an economic reckoning. Capital can't fuel growth if it's trapped in bureaucracy. Again, the idea that we should be forced to invest locally and domestically, it's flawed thinking, it's flawed logic. Why should a person living in Germany have to invest in Germany? I mean, look at the country. The country has banned nuclear energy, electricity prices have boomed, Germany's moved from being the world's manufacturing hub to an economy that is shrinking and getting smaller and smaller each year. Why? Because the leaders in Germany are embarking on passing rules that do not make sense. Why should a German citizen be forced to invest their money locally and domestically? It doesn't make sense. And again, that line about capital being trapped in bureaucracy, doesn't that sound similar to what Christine Lagarde was recently saying when she was frustrated about CBDCs not being passed as quickly as she liked because she was openly saying democracy is holding us back?
We are getting ready for that deadline, but we will not be able to move unless the other parties, the stakeholders as I call them, Commission, Council and Parliament, actually complete the legislative process, without which we will not be able to move.
So we're about to get to the most important part of Larry's little letter here. So we can see capital can't fuel growth if it's trapped in bureaucracy, yet the EU operates under 27 different legal systems. And even if you navigate that red tape and decide to invest, say, in an energy company, it can take 13 years just to permit a power line. Again, is Larry saying all of these different laws and regulations are bad? Let's just roll them all up into one global level of rules and regulations? I don't know, I'm just reading between the lines, but it sure looks like that. And here's another very key line. The result is paralysis. Europeans save more than 3 times as much of their income as Americans, but invest far less of it. Again, what is wrong with saving money and saving capital? This is what capitalism is built on, and capitalism is what's built the productive world that we all get to enjoy today. It's not socialism, it's not communism that's put us where we are today. That is what has pulled us back. What's wrong with saving money? Anyway, Larry says, however, the ground in Europe is shifting. There's growing momentum to remove the barriers holding capital back, faster permitting, less red tape on AI, a single regulatory framework instead of 27, and most critically, a true savings and investments union. If that doesn't scream alarm bells and red flags, I don't know what will. Again, I'll remind you, the core concept of the savings and investment union is literally openly, publicly admitted to be trying to get the 10 trillion euros in savings accounts of depositors pushed into EU markets and EU priorities, as the European Central Bank calls them. Larry here says, if I were an EU politician, that savings and investment union would be my top priority. Investors will be watching closely to see if the reform sticks. Of course, expanding markets won't fix everything. Unchecked financialization can fuel inequality. That is not true. Financialization in the way that Larry Fink is describing it is not what is causing inequality. It's the central planning that he's advocating for that creates the inequality. Larry says that unchecked financialization was the first draft of globalization. Enormous wealth, unevenly distributed with little thought for who benefited or what is wrong with wealth inequality? There's nothing wrong with that. If someone like Jeff Bezos creates an incredible amount of value for society, and if he employs hundreds of thousands of people at his company Amazon, he should have an unequal amount of wealth. The kid works for 80 hours a week. He works 7 days a week. This is what most people miss with the whole tax the rich narrative. The reason why most people are rich is because they work 80-hour weeks. They should be paid unequally. But let's finish looking at what Larry says here, and then we're gonna have a look at what I'm calling the great BlackRock Bitcoin trap. So Larry concludes his letter with saying, what's emerging now is globalization's second draft, a re-globalization built not just to generate prosperity, but to aim it towards the people and places left behind the first time. Again, it's a nice feel-good narrative that Larry's trying to frame in this letter. But unless you really look at every word and phrase that he decides to use with a magnifying glass, so to say, it's not until you do that that you begin to see the deeper, darker plan here, which gets me into the great Bitcoin trap. So many people think that Larry has done a full 180 flip. Again, in 2022 and 2023, Larry Fink was kind of like the Bond villain. Him and Klaus Schwab, they were arm in arm, and they were the big proponents saying that we need to promote this ESG scoring for all companies and assets like Bitcoin. They were saying an asset must be environmentally friendly, socially agreeable, also have sufficient governance, which of course is double speak for what the true meaning of ESG actually was. But for 2022 and 2023, Bitcoin was labeled as an anti-ESG asset. They said it was bad for the environment. We give anybody who invests into Bitcoin or Bitcoin companies as a bad ESG framework. Now, since 2023, a lot of people think that Larry's had this come to Jesus moment, and now he's saying, oh, Bitcoin's this great asset. It's digitizing gold. It's a legitimate asset. He even says that Bitcoin is kind of the thing that you run to when you fear your government. If Larry has really done full 180 flip, why is he publishing letters like this in the Financial Times? Why is he becoming the co-chair of the World Economic Forum as Klaus Schwab was forced to quietly step down? So I don't know about you guys, I just don't like the idea of trusting BlackRock. I mean, they've very quickly accumulated over 800,000 Bitcoin. That's more than 4% of the supply in less than 2 years. And I just don't think we should be trusting Larry Fink as much as many people Now again, I'm not the only person who's skeptical about BlackRock. Billionaire Peter Thiel recently had this to say.
Are you still convinced?
I think it's gotten partially unlocked with the Bitcoin ETF, but then probably the part where I'm less convinced of is this question of the sort of ideological founding vision of Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies as sort of a cypherpunk, crypto-anarchist, libertarian, anti-centralized government thing. This is always the line.
Isn't that what got you interested in the first place?
That's what I thought was terrific about it. And then the question is, does it really work that way? Or has that thread somehow gotten lost?
Now, I don't necessarily think Bitcoin's being co-opted by BlackRock. The reason why I don't think it has is because I can still hold Bitcoin in one of these. This is a hardware wallet. Again, I can take custody of my own Bitcoin where I don't trust Larry Fink. This is the big problem today. 4% of the Bitcoin network trusts Larry Fink. We all saw the recent headlines where Bloomberg was reporting where BlackRock and Wall Street is pulling OG Bitcoiners into their orbit. That's because a lot of these OG Bitcoiners who are sitting on billions of dollars of coins are depositing their Bitcoin in something like a BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, and they're using that to borrow against, or they're using that to engage in the financial system. I don't think this is what we should be doing. I think the revolution here is taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. Again, if you want to get a hardware wallet, whether that's a Trezor or a Ledger, check out the links down below so that you do not have to trust BlackRock. This is what Bitcoin's all about. It's about disintermediating the banks and the institutions who for 5,000 years have just said, trust us, bro. We have your money. We have your paper money. We've got your gold. It's all in the bank. Bitcoin gives us the ability to say, screw you, I want to verify. I want to hold my own assets. But I don't want you guys to think that this is just a philosophical reason to be holding your own Bitcoin. I think the consequences of not holding your own Bitcoin could be catastrophic is a strong word, but let's read what BlackRock put in their original Bitcoin ETF filing way back in 2023. They openly said, in the event of a hypothetical hard fork, BlackRock, the sponsor, gets to dictate which fork is the real Bitcoin. And they openly say that they are under no obligation to choose the most economic chain. So I've been warning about this disclosure hidden on page 23 of BlackRock's filing way back since 2023. The day after it, I made a video and a viral tweet thread on the topic saying, do not trust BlackRock. This is a red flag. And I think the BlackRock's recent letter where they openly said, hey, let's channel citizen savings into capital markets is maybe just another little nugget of truth that exposes their true intentions here. And maybe they outlined their Bitcoin endgame 3 years ago and nobody's paying attention to it yet. And maybe people will only start paying attention when they're absolutely forced to. Again, I get it, BlackRock and the ETF, it's incredibly convenient. It's so easy to buy a little bit of IBIT in your stock brokerage platform, but I will encourage you, please, for the love of sovereignty, do not trust BlackRock with all of your assets. Again, you can buy Bitcoin, or alternatively, you could mine Bitcoin. This is the best way to get your hands on Bitcoin. If you're interested in buying the Bitcoin mining rigs yourself or taking advantage of a hosted mining solution, highly encourage you guys book a call with Blockware. They're gonna do all the hard work for you guys. They've got the 4 locations in America where they do all of the dirty work for you. They have mining facilities, they have it all there. They plug in your miners and they'll pay you out in Bitcoin. All you have to do is give them a Bitcoin address. I highly recommend you guys look into that if you are looking to get your hands on Bitcoin in a sovereign way so that you do not have to trust BlackRock. I think in the next 5 years, again, I get a lot of pushback when I say this potentially hyperbolic statement, but I think there's going to be 9 billion people in the planet and they're going to be divided based on these 2 variables. One, there will be people who own Bitcoin, and then there will be people who own nothing and they're probably not happy. Again, I think Bitcoin's your solution out of this, but no Bitcoin ETFs that BlackRock promote or publicly traded stocks is going to be your solution out of the end game that these non-elected bureaucrats like Larry Fink is trying to make a reality. Again, I'll encourage you guys, just ignore the orange ties and the suit coiners trying to sell you on the idea of short-term profits by buying XYZ stock. Keep it really simple. Buy Bitcoin, put it in a self-custody, never sell the thing. I think it's pretty obvious at this point. They're coming for your money. The EU and the UK are passing new laws nearly every day, actively admitting the fact that they're coming for your money, and your digital CBDC is going to have an expiration date or a savings limit, as the EU recently talked about. If you missed that announcement, I'm going to put a link to a recent deep dive I did on that topic somewhere around there. And if you're in the mood for maybe a little bit more of a positive video, I might put a link to a video where I looked at exactly how little Bitcoin you need to retire somewhere around there. And with all that said, hope you enjoy those two videos up on screen. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this one, and I'll see you all in the next BlackRock deep dive.